call this episode Problems and Causes.
Hello, I'm Avery Man. My figurative identity as a representative of the common humanity of America. I want to do what Thomas Paine did, and that is to motivate the people of the United States to improve our republic, to give ourselves a voice to reach our national government. Before I introduce the subject of this episode, number 3, the committee asked me to make a clearer expression of our purpose in this project. If you've been following our project, you know that our committee is the Committee of 5, including Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, Patrick Henry, Hannah Arendt, and myself, and me, the sole living member and the secretary of the committee. This is the statement we created, statement of purpose. We are deeply concerned for the future of the Republican form of government in the United States. We therefore advocate not resistance through destructive conflict or perpetual protest, but deliberate action to restore our republic, to reform it into what it might have reasonably been from the beginning. We believe constructive democratic action removes any legitimate justification that a government might want to find to suppress any dissent through violence or whatever. Protest alone opposes what people fear. We seek instead to build what the people deserve, a genuine representation, accountable institution, and self-government founded on the consent of the governed. Our purpose is not to weaken our constitutional government, but to strengthen it, and to renew its legitimacy by peaceful, rational, democratic, and deliberate means. Instead of fighting what we fear, we suggest working for something better, what we deserve. So that's what we're proposing here. In this episode, we will analyze the problems of our society and our government and methods of government in a systematic way. Our view is, might say, from the International Space Station or from the moon. So from that distance, we don't see the two sides fighting. We just see a war going on that we don't believe should have started in the first place. It's a war created by dividing the people of the United States so that certain partisan interests and their rich donors can keep power to control our government and economy to their advantage. It's the old strategy of divide and rule. So this is episode 3 in our series, Self-Government and Consent of the Governed. We call this episode 2 Causes, Culture and Structure. Here we'll define and describe 7 problems or symptoms of this faction-driven system, and we'll begin to consider their roots or underlying causes. Later on, in future episodes, we'll move on to offer proposals, actual actions and steps on how we propose could go about to restore our republic. Meanwhile, we explained in the first episode how Franklin and Paine have already reconvened the delegates from the original Constitution from 1787 in Philadelphia. However, they improved the membership this time, 2026, by adding a few members who could not or chose not to attend. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams the second and third presidents, are among those who didn't attend the Constitutional Convention. They were serving as ambassadors to France and England for George Washington. And Paine wasn't included partly because he immigrated to America in 1774, relatively new, and he was also on personal business in France at the time. In any case, Franklin and Paine convinced those other patriots to join this 2026 Quantum Field Constitutional Convention. And it included Paine, as we explained. And so the total membership of this convention turned out to be 59. So Franklin and Paine posed three questions to this group, and I think we reported briefly on the first two earlier, but we didn't cover the third answer. So I turn the floor over now to Thomas Paine to review these questions and their answers in more detail. Paine?
Franklin ran this part of our project while I did little more than observed. These are the questions we asked, and the delegation's answers.
Our first question was this: are you satisfied with the state of the United States as it functions now? Most were pleased with the economic and military success of the nation, but very few were faintly satisfied with how the federal government functions today. They understand the dissatisfactions with most citizens, and many wonder why so little is being done. Patrick Henry wanted to deliver this answer.
Do you believe that there should be another convention to alter the Constitution? The Declaration of Independence states that the people should have the right to alter or abolish a government that is not serving them to their satisfaction or consent. Just over 1/3 of the delegates supported a full convention to alter the Constitution extensively. A similar percentage, over 1/3, thought it could be achieved with some number of individual amendments, and the concurrence in the legislature to develop several laws to reform how the federal government operates. Almost exactly 1/4 opposed a full convention and suggested legislative procedures and political pressures might cure the problems sufficiently. And now I pass the gavel back to Franklin.
3. Prepare a list of fewer than 10 that capture the most important problems and their causes, contributing to the political crisis in America. I ask they frame them in broad or abstract terms, so they do not incriminate one political faction over the other.
The 7 problems. Let us examine the deliberations of our rebooted convention. I kept notes of these proceedings, and James Madison did as well, as he did during the original convention. He provided me with his notes, which I have incorporated here. Washington joined Franklin in leading this discussion, because he is very concerned about the intensity of partisanship in America today.
The delegation identified 7 core problems. However, we asked the delegates to identify any root causes of those problems. I asked and required them to consider the totality of society and government broadly and not focus on either side or any positions. Causes could be mechanisms or processes, designs and information and feedback loops. They identified 2 sources: first, epistemology, or culture, and second, structure. Epistemology, or culture, is a branch of philosophy dealing with how citizens reach conclusions or beliefs of truth, legitimacy, and faith. These form a person's worldview, and the beliefs and principles follow as consistent. At a more practical level, we call this culture. Cultures are defined by shared beliefs and matters of faith and truth, including loyalty, public myths, trusted authorities, and moral values, and the stories people use to explain the world. By structure, we mean the design of the social and political power and control through systems including institutions, rules, and incentives. In this sense, structure means more than government alone, but how authority is created and limits enforced. We review the 7 problems in their significance. First, we code whether it is a cultural problem, or structural, or both. Problem 1. Incentives that reward escalation. This one is driven by both structural and cultural causes. Factions arise naturally, but modern institutional incentives reward outrage while partisan media cultures normalize conflict. Both of these effects are decidedly anti-republican and pro-despotism. Definitions. Incentives include income, donations, and power. Escalations come from grievance and fear aroused by propaganda. Mechanisms of these incentives are news and social media attention. Outlets gain power by promoting division. Constitutional relevance. Office holders are obligated to adhere to party orthodoxy. If someone strays, they are shunned. The political significance is that the parties allot representational power to divisive political parties. The consequence is political polarization of the people. That is the first problem. Patrick Henry will describe the second problem in our list.
I am assigned to 2 of the 7 central problems. This one is 2. Asymmetrical accountability, a structural problem. Definition: asymmetrical means disbalanced, and accountability referring to responsibility, limits, and liability. The asymmetry lies in how governments hold people, businesses, and professions to account, to varying degrees. While governments and public officials are largely exempt from scrutiny and accountability to the same measures of responsibility, limits, and consequences. Mechanisms of control are defined in the Constitution and in law. However, the Constitution distributes power but is silent or vague in limits and means for control of that power. Constitutional relevance. I proclaim that the Constitution is held with little regard by those who believe it is their right to wield power to bend society to their will. They may sincerely believe that their will serves the best interests of the people, but I say the people must express their will how they will consent to be governed. Political significance. Governments have power over people, but people have very little effect over government unless they wield financial or political weight. Consequence. There are no clear and effective means to control or limit government power, except impeachment, which history has proven to be a political and partisan exercise with little attention to justice. I invite Thomas Paine to present problem number 3.
The people of the United States know that their federal government does not represent their interests. The delegates call this problem 3, representation distortion. Representation refers to the level of influence an interest can effect on governments. The most obvious distortion is the influence of large donors. Many lobbyists even bring drafts of legislation that representatives simply introduce to Congress. It is a structural cause of our current crisis. Some distortions are well known, like the Electoral College favoring state power over the people. It creates a significant imbalance in our republic. Then there is the Senate, where states have equal power despite huge differences in population. Consider D.C. versus Wyoming. Representation is vastly skewed. The Constitution begins with "we the people," but immediately concedes power to the states, and eventually to 2 competing political parties. This was an intense issue during the ratification debates of 1787. The main concern then was the new federal government usurping state sovereignty. The consequence is general public dissatisfaction. I reluctantly turn the floor to Franklin, though I am perhaps more adamant about this than he.
I insisted on taking this cause from Paine because I believe it is the easiest to remedy. Number 4 is the electoral system rigidity, duopoly and plurality votes. Plurality voting structurally pressures voters toward 2-party competition and discourages independent political participation. The United States operates elections following an archaic system that almost guarantees political division into 2 factions. Plurality voting and single-member districts sponsor dichotomies in politics, as proven by mathematics and logic Duverger's law. The Constitution leaves it to states on how to run elections, even in federal elections. This may be the strongest structural cause that propagates the 2-party duopoly and control of American government. The plurality and single representative systems essentially prevent any prospects for any alternative political party to win any elections. Voting for a secondary party in a plurality system is often a spoiler effect, turning natural differences into a hardened binary. I turn our attention to Patrick Henry for the next political quandary facing America today.
Thank you, Dr. Franklin. My particular concern is the 5th problem, executive power expansion. This involves both cultural and structural causes. Administrations of both parties have expanded executive authority. Since the 2 parties are woefully divided, it is often impossible to pass critical legislation and budgets through Congress. This gridlock creates a vacuum crying for resolution, which creates opportunities for the president to step in. The delegates in the original convention argued at some length how to structure the executive branch. Many wanted a panel, but the idea of a unitary executive won the day, likely due to frustrations with the Articles of Confederation. Today, many complain that the executive is exceeding its enumerated powers under the Constitution. The Committee of Five is unanimous in opposition to this trend. The anti-federalists warned of a monarch or despot. I am now proud to invite Hannah Arendt back to our discussion. In our times, we were not aware of how man is guided by personal beliefs and emotions. History, philosophy, and science have shown those earlier assumptions of pure reason were idealistic.
Earlier, I spoke about how knowledge and insight into the human condition deepened with Darwin and Freud. Those discoveries altered human understanding of ourselves profoundly. I died in 1971, and even since my time, the perspective of human reason has examined deeper depths of human nature at a biological or survival level. Since my passing, biological imperatives of tribalism and human needs for belonging, acceptance, and conformity have been brought into sharper focus. Epistemological fragmentation. Competing realities undermine shared standards of truth, evidence, trust, and democratic deliberation. Epistemology is the philosophical term for what we call cultural differences, or the polarization of identity politics we see today. The delegates chose the word fragmentation, but a better choice might have been splitting, because these forces have created two halves, not many pieces. People's worldviews on more or less theoretical grounds like free will versus determinism, man's nature as fundamentally cooperative or antagonistic, and the role of religion in a person's beliefs have been turned into conflicts over moral values, purposes, and political membership. American society has been divided into two camps of truth and meaning, with two clearly distinct channels of information and interpretation. Limited to two parties, there are no common grounds. Besides United States, the United States needs a united people of the United States. There have been periods of our history where we have enjoyed a general sense of accord, such as the much-applauded period following World War II when Avery was raised. Politically, this is profound. Of the 7 problems, this is the only one that is distinctly epistemological or cultural, but it is of such significance we agree with the delegates that the two cores are of equal importance. A society that cannot agree on anything cannot define how to be governed. Civic disengagement and loss of Republican virtue. Citizens lack civic formation, while centralized institutions reduce meaningful public participation and responsibility. Citizens become spectators at a Roman Colosseum where gladiators and victims perform battles and sacrifices for the glory of their party. American citizens have never been educated or expected to participate in a true version of Republican governance. Republics require citizens trained for self-government, but American society turns voters into spectators and consumers. The political messaging stresses that the other side is dangerous, if not evil, wicked, vile, and disgusting. This creates significant barriers of expectations with people vigilant for insult and fabrications and prepared to engage with righteous indignation. With that, we have reviewed the 7 problems that our 2026 Convention of Constitutional Delegates identified. We also noted that they identified just 2 basic or root causes of the many problems, which they called epistemological causes, and we call human nature or cultural challenges, and the second cause is structural problems or design flaws. We return to Avery to conclude this episode and introduce us to the next.
Thank you, Madam Arendt. Hannah, you just reviewed what this episode covered, and the next two will follow logically. That is, the fourth will focus on the cultural or epistemic or human nature aspects of our political difficulties in America today, how people have trouble getting along talking about politics. The next episode after that will be Franklin, who will be looking into the structural side of our analysis, and we'll be looking at the structure of the Constitution and making recommendations from what he calls an Aristotelian framework. It may sound complex and highly philosophical or something, but it's really not. It's common sense. Our intent is to discuss critical subjects in a way that people can practice too, and to conduct constructive political conversations at the level that we'll be presenting here. Again, our purpose is not to assign blame, but to recognize many aspects of human nature that make it natural for us to both cooperate in unimaginable scales and to engage in conflicts and wars that could potentially destroy the planet and end our species. Our purpose, again, is to encourage people to take action to restore our republic toward self-government and consent of the governed. We appreciate your attention and hope you will join in an effort to save our republic. Thank you, and please stay tuned.